obscure review on show. I'm gonna react to Lloyd being Sabotaged his rap career.
I don't even know.
He couldn't even tell you, like, at any point when you speak to him, what the problem is. Damn. I put him, like, where I put Marquise.
Oh, wow.
Like, they just have something internally just going on with them that gives them some sort of resentment towards me, and I just don't even care about what's going on.
He just ignore it. 50, he's gonna ignore you.
You still got some money?
Show us what you living like. If you ain't got no money, I'll give you $5,000 for the banks. And then cut the music for 1 second. We just having us some hip hop. We discussing Lloyd Banks right now. One of my homies just said he never really stopped being a Lloyd Banks fan. So I said, look, I hit the blunts once. I came up with a dope title for Lloyd Banks' next LP or EP, Victim of Circumstance.
And look, I like Rick Ross music. Don't get me wrong. I like his shit. Rick Ross has some fire songs, like Gangsta Bro, but Lloyd Banks on that Officer Down, he violated Rick Ross, bro. He violated him, bro. No funny shit. Banks violated Rick Ross on that song, and that song is fire, bro. No funny shit. One of the most underrated diss songs, in my opinion.
As much as it may seem like the ultimate goal, becoming an overnight sensation is a dangerous route. Suddenly awarded everything you could ever want in the blink of an eye, the slew of one-hit wonders that hip-hop has birthed have made its pitfalls all too clear to see. Widely regarded as one of hip-hop's finest MCs and unofficial punchline king, Lloyd Banks is a fan favorite to most who lived through the commercial boom of the 2000s. But in the eyes of some, he's the poster boy for taking your foot off the gas. Largely seen as G-Unit's second-in-command and the most skilled lyricist, Banks showed all the signs of a superstar. After putting his best foot forward on G-Unit's Beg for Mercy, his 2004 debut album would solidify him as a platinum-selling artist that was following in 50's footsteps. But as the years have passed, its title, The Hunger for More, almost feels ironic, as over 17 years on from its release, it still marks a high that he's never quite replicated. Instead of managing to outdo himself, Lloyd felt the pulse of hip-hop fade away. Left scrambling to pick up the pieces after his follow-up record, The Big Withdrawal, was leaked, his eventual 2007 record, Rotten Apple, would still sell 600,000 copies, but its impact and acclaim paled in comparison to Hunger for More. And by the time 2010's A Hunger for More 2 released, his cultural impact would wane as well. As such, any praise that's come his way has often felt like a disheartening reminder of what should have been. At the turn of the last decade, Kanye, who'd link up with Banks on several occasions, including the underrated Good Friday gem, Christian Dior Denim Flow, labeled him the most underrated top 5 MC. And for Banks, this was a source of pride.
I was in the studio, and somebody hit me with that and told me that, what he said as far as the top 5 thing. And for me, hearing that, it's just like, damn, because I got, the utmost respect for what he does as an artist. So.
Banks is my favorite rapper, and he Kanye West's favorite rapper, top 5, dead or alive.
That's a fact.
Just a month or so before Hunger for More 2 surfaced, it gave fans a renewed hope that Banks would make good on all of that early promise. After all, for a man that was nearly fatally shot twice just months before his come-up, his setbacks were nothing new.
I was hurt pretty bad. The best we said about it got there. A couple minutes later, I could have, died from blood loss. But I felt like it wasn't over for me. That's why I kept saying, man, just stitch my up, let me go. I'm about to go on tour.
Despite this salute from the man that was undeniably at the top of the game at the time, Lloyd continued to freefall. And as for why this was the case, there's a whole host of factors to take into account. For one thing, he had the looming shadow of G-Unit to contend with. Although he was universally praised for his abilities on the mic, Lloyd's place in the game was obscured as he was always seen as playing second fiddle to 50 Cent. And as the other members of G-Unit such as Young Buck and Tony Yayo jostled for the spotlight, their tendency to move as one brought about a situation in which, in a commercial sense, he blended in when he should have been standing out. As a result, some mainstream outlets and casual fans simply saw him as another foot soldier to 50 rather than a man that had harbored untapped greatness within himself. So much so that in a fiery chat with Fat Man Scoop, the late DMX took issue with the rapper's assertion that Banks was one of the finest lyricists in the game, as he'd actually confused him with the fellow G-Unit alum, Tony Yayo.
Wait, Banks? Lyricist? Quote 4 bars. Impress me with 4 bars is. That shouldn't be hard. Give me 2.
Later, X cleared the air and gave Banks his props, but it only added to the prevailing sentiment that along the way, Lloyd's place in hip-hop history had been misaligned. Steeped in the G-Unit camp since the early days, not only did Banks play second fiddle to 50, but he also became the next line of defense when 50 found himself in a lyrical feud. And one particular detour that left Banks fighting battles on G-Unit's behalf, as opposed to focusing on his own career, Lloyd waged an infamous verbal war with the Game over numerous diss tracks. But in later interviews, the Game said there wasn't any actual beef, and upon reflection, the two were among the most tightest in G-Unit.
Banks is still like one of my favorite MCs. Like we used to go bar for bar in the studio on who was going to get the second verse. So I'm with Banks. I hated the out of Yayo, but I mean I'm 40 now. There's no animosity with him either.
No matter.
But I haven't heard all.
How high they were riding at their base. For Mercy Peak, the unraveling of 50 as a hardened, unapologetic businessman made it clear that if he didn't see a substantial return on his investments, he wouldn't hesitate to make it known. And over the years, Banks had been gradually disowned and hung out to dry by his former label boss. Although the original G-Unit crew would briefly unite across 2014 and 2015, Curtis had already made it known that he'd given up on Banks' career as far back as 2012. There's a point when artists need to develop themselves and their things on their own. He's reached that point, 50 told Funkmaster Flex. You work for me, but I'm working for you. That's the concept that's been going on their entire career. Interpreted as tough love by some and an outing of his longtime friend to others, 50 would then double down on his criticism of Banks in his 2020 book, Hustle Harder, Hustle Smarter. And as a part of a broad takedown of his former G-Unit signees, 50 suggested that the blame for Lloyd's squandered potential centered around a refusal to be proactive.
Banks was more content staying on his porch and watching the world from there. Banks wanted things to come to him, as opposed to going out and getting them for himself. That's not me trying to assassinate his character. The guy has Lazy Lloyd tattooed on his arm. He literally wears his laziness on his sleeve. To me, one answer was to change how he interacted with the culture. That's why years ago, I told Banks to film a video of his life and post it on YouTube. Maybe something he says or does will create a spark, go viral, and then he'll have some heat around him again.
At the time, Lloyd refused.
So maybe that's why, like maybe Banks or 50 not seeing eye to eye. Cause 50 feel like Banks was being like lazy and not really doing too much.
To acknowledge 50's words, but it's possible that when you're such an elite wordsmith and dedicated so much time to the craft, the other stuff can seem like an afterthought. As for the idea that he was unwilling to adapt, it's important to remember that Banks had expressed annoyance with the current state of the rap game. When asked about the release date of his Cold Corner 3 mixtape at a 2015 show at BB King's in NYC, Lloyd said, "Y'all waiting on part 3, right? This is what I'm gonna do. I'm thinking about releasing it, and when I do, you will pay for it. And it will be pre-orders out there. And if I'm not satisfied with the numbers I get back, it just won't come out. It's that simple," he continued. "I'm so frustrated with hip-hop right now." Sure enough, that project never arrived until 2020. Angered by the new parameters of the game, Banks used the years that followed 2010's Hunger for More 2 to get back on his mixtape grind. And while it resulted in him garnering adoration from his day ones, the only problem is that when you start your career in the commercial space and make such a massive splash, it can make reverting back to your underground hustle seem like a fall off rather than your rightful place. And as much of an issue as that is as an external viewpoint, once it's internalized, it becomes a real problem. By 2019, the issue of Banks' laziness seemed to be wreaking havoc in his camp. In response to a fan's request for one more record, Banks declared, "Let's be real, ain't nobody checking for me anymore." Horrified by the
That's a fact. Nobody's really checking for Banks anymore. That is a fact. I ain't gonna lie. Nobody's really checking for him.
that someone as talented as Banks could ever wish to hang it up, this sparked a grassroots campaign in which fans and fellow artists such as Joe Budden tried to dissuade Lloyd from stepping away from the game.
Let's be real. Ain't nobody checking for Banks anymore.
He's right.
Shut up.
You just said you're surprised more people didn't hop on what he said. You know why they didn't? Because nobody checking for Banks.
Rappers need a more dramatic exit, like I just said for Nick.
No, it's that.
And Banks is another one that deserves a better exit than that.
While in the case of some of his former nemesis, such as Rick Ross, his absence from the game and his dwindling prospects made it a fitting time to mock him.
Banks, you still got some money? Show us what you living like. If you ain't got no money, I'll give you $5,000 for the Banks name. So I came up with a dope title for Lloyd Banks' next LP or EP, Victim of Circumstance.
With Lloyd simply responding that he'll never join the circus, he may have refused to rise to Ross, but whatever the case was, these events seemingly lit a fire under Banks. After an extended period in the wilderness, Banks integrated back into the game through the championing of Griselda and Cold Corner 3. However, what we couldn't have known was that this would pave the way for a fourth studio album, The Course of the Inevitable. A record on which Banks wouldn't just demonstrate his immense talent, but got people talking again. Critically acclaimed as it may be, it's still been subject to some derisory observations from one of the game's most controversial pundits.
By the way, there's no 50 Cent on it. Oh, hell no. That just brought me back in 2005 again. I gotta get my 7X t-shirts, the one that look like bed sheets. I need to get on some Jetson Maida track or whatever.
As dismissive as academics had been, others were quick to heap praise and lend their support. Within days of its release, the project had endorsements from Travis Scott, Busta Rhymes, J. Cole, Raekwon, Conway the Machine, and others. Presenting a rare case where the rapper has been given his props while he's there to bask in it, Course of the Inevitable shipped 12,000 units in the first week alongside special merch deals. And while it's not the platinum certified hit of the past, retaining his independence meant that for Banks, this translated to cold, hard profit. And with little to no promo, other than word of mouth, he did it his way. While on album highlight Stranger Things, Lloyd even took the time out to respond to 50's dismissive claims that his work ethic, or lack thereof, ruined his career. Always humble, usually disciplined, and never hated. Call me quiet, call me lazy, talent never faded. Briefly perched upon the top of the iTunes charts and with tracks alongside Meek Mill, Gucci Mane, and Lil Durk still residing in the vault for a future release, Banks has suggested that the best is still yet to come. But by rediscovering his hunger and refusing to harp on past glories or the dubious hand that he'd been dealt, Lloyd Banks has put himself in the best possible position for a Hall of Fame-worthy comeback. And if both the features on the record and the support that it's received is anything to go by, he has the whole culture behind him. So, 15 years on from his initial release, Lloyd Banks has a chance to reimagine his legacy and upgrade it from a story of squandered potential to a long journey back to the genre's promised land.
Okay, that's the video. What's your thoughts on Lloyd Banks, bro? Like, I mean, if he do like come back, like, who do y'all want to see him collab with? Who y'all see him like collabing? Who new artists do y'all see him collabing with, bro? Let's be honest, like, be honest. And Lloyd Banks is a fire rapper, bro. He's a fire rapper. He's underrated, bro. Lloyd Banks is underrated. He's valid, bro. Like, nigga could spit bars, bro. Like, I ain't gonna hold you. He violated Rick Ross, like I said earlier in the video, with that Officer Down track. And yeah, tell me what's your favorite Lloyd Banks song. Comment down below. Make sure y'all like, comment, subscribe. Y'all know the vibes. If you're checking out, you are.